It's Friday, the 9th of February, 2024.
The last word in podcasting news. This is the Podnews Weekly Review with James Cridlin and Sam Sethi.
Sam Sethi's away this week. I'm James Cridlin, the editor of Podnews.
And I'm Dave Jones from the Podcast Index.
In the chapters today, Spotify almost makes money and no more exclusives. Podcast search optimization, it's a thing. And is all the money going into AI these days? Plus...
Hello, this is Daryl Battaglia from Triton Digital. Later, we will be talking about the U.S. podcast report that was just released.
And I'm Claire Waite-Brown, and later on, I'll be talking about my experience at Podfest.
They will.
This podcast is sponsored by Buzzsprout, podcast hosting made easy with easy and powerful tools, free learning materials, and remarkable customer support.
And we're sponsored by a new show called Why Your Podcast Isn't Growing, a show made to help you get more new listeners. They've just posted 3 ways to increase the discoverability of your podcast for faster growth, probably something that we'll talk about a little bit later. You can find Why Your Podcast Isn't Growing wherever you got this podcast.
From your daily newsletter, the Podnews Weekly Review.
Dave, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. What is the Podcast Index for people who don't know, first of all?
Oh, goodness. The Podcast Index is primarily a podcast directory, but I guess the secondary function of it is to give podcast apps a back end when they don't have one. So back ends for podcasting are expensive. Got to do a lot of aggregation, millions of feeds, all that kind of thing. And so we provide that for free, and we run on donations, value for value model, and that's what we do.
Yeah, and you so you run that, and you also, I get the feeling by accident, are the head wrangler of Podcasting 2.0, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But
we do lots of things by accident.
Yeah. Was that a kind of a thing of... I get the feeling that the Podcast Index was a thing that needed building and is a great thing, and we use it for the Podnews podcast pages and everything else. But I get the feeling that you weren't necessarily expecting to be also looking after a brand new feature set for new podcast apps.
No, I would say that's fair. Yeah, we brought out the namespace because we needed a couple of features. And then it just became sort of a happy accident that the namespace attracted all kinds of, once you have ideas for features, then 10 other people also have ideas because things have been building up. So it became just sort of a, campfire that everybody could gather around and throw their ideas in the pot. And before we knew it, we had a burgeoning 2.0 namespace and all kinds of things. And, I don't simply maintain it. You're also a maintainer on the namespace, and it's a party.
Yeah, it is. And yes, very much looking forward to it. I don't know whether or not I can announce it yet, but Daniel J. Lewis and I have been working on a thing, ideally to help people like LT Escobar understand a bit more about what Podcasting 2.0 is all about. And if I can announce it, then I would be announcing that it's there's a website that you can now go and see. It's at podcast2.org. See what we did there?
Yeah. Nice.
What do you think of that?
I like it. I also approve of this Todd Cochran-based shadiness that you're using to hide whatever this is y'all are building. This is wonderful.
Can't talk about it yet. Yes, so podcasting2.org, and it's a website that anybody can edit, which is nice on the GitHub. And and it's been really good fun working on that with Daniel. So yes, if it's not announced by now, then this is me announcing it. So I'm sure Daniel will be delighted about that.
I'm looking forward to it. He's got great design chops. He's a good.
He does. Yeah, he does. So I think we're still working on it, but I think it should be a good thing. Shall we get to the stories for this week? Why not start with the heart of the podcast industrial complex, Dave?
Let's do it. I want to call. You made a comment the other day that said that our use of this phrase, when I say our, I mean mine and Adam's use of the phrase "podcast industrial complex" is, quote, singularly unhelpful.
Yes,
and I'm going to push back on this and say we actually say lots of unhelpful things. This is not the only one.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. Yeah.
So anyway, So it's all about Spotify. They announced Joe Rogan has renewed his agreement, but it's not exclusive anymore. Spotify released their latest financial results.
Yes, they did. Total revenue growing 16% year on year to $3.9 billion. All the company's figures met or exceeded expectations, so they said. The company only lost $81 million in the quarter, which apparently is rather better than was flagged in December. I don't know about you. I'm not sure I could lose $81 million in a year, let alone in a quarter, but still, there we go. Daniel Ek does, though, say that the podcast business almost broke even in the quarter and thinks it's good news for next year.
When we had our Investor Day last year, we outlined then podcasting was a drag to the business, but something we were committed to turn around. And I'm pleased to say in Q4, we were very close to break even on that business, which gives me a lot of confidence that as we get into 2024, we will achieve the full year profitability target on podcasting. On the top line side, we're still seeing healthy growth on engagement. That engagement in turn means there'll be more opportunities for us to monetize those engagement hours. On the bottom line, we have doubled down on the deals that worked, and we've gotten out of a lot of the deals that didn't work. And that's the result you're now seeing with the close to break even, and that then will lead to a positive podcasting business in 2024.
I never really trust accountants, Dave. Close to break even.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many ways to slice that. It's, is that, are we talking EBITDA? Are we talking, profit or operational profit? This is a new term that I've...
Yeah, and I think it might be operational profit because I tell you what, the amount of severance payments that Spotify has been making recently can't have been. I mean, that's why they lost $81 million in the quarter, wasn't it? It's that they've actually got rid of an awful lot of people. I learned yesterday, by the way, or I learned last week, that the word redundancy is not understood by Americans. So I have to use the word layoff or firing or something like that.
It took me a while to figure out what you meant by redundancy. It makes sense in retrospect, but no, that is not an American term at all. Layoffs or you just got fired. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's pretty well it. Daniel Ek also went into detail about the new deals that they've made with podcasters, why they don't do exclusives anymore, not that they really did anyway, he reckons.
Generally speaking, we had multiple strategies in podcasting. It wasn't just all about exclusivities, even if that got most of the sort of press headlines. And what we've been able to see here is, as we've been learning over these past few years, is that while some of these exclusivity deals worked, generally it wasn't aligned with what the creator wanted. The creator wants to have broader audience, and I feel like with these new deals that we've been making for most of 2023, we are in a position where we're actually better aligned with the creator. We can both deliver the growth rate, and we are equally incentivized to drive audience growth and, of course, then also drive revenue growth because we both share in that upside. Today, Spotify is, in many cases, the number one podcasting player already. So exclusivity makes sense when you're the smaller player trying to gain scale. When you're the bigger player, the additional value of the exclusivity is far smaller than it is about being aligned. And it feels also that from a values point of view, this is better aligned with who we are at Spotify too.
Now, if I had Adam Curry's little bell, I think I'd be ringing it a little bit in the middle of that because there's quite a lot, I think, there that makes a little bit of sense, Dave. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing, as far as the exclusivity goes, I don't think this is unique to podcasting. I think this is across the board. I think we're seeing a breakdown of exclusivity as a business model. I think when the easy money dries up and things are harder and funds are harder to raise, I think you do have to broaden your scope because they, like, just take video games for instance. And we were seeing Microsoft just announcing that they're going to have that they're going to bring all of their Bethesda games to the PlayStation Network. I think we're seeing, which is exactly opposite of what they said when they bought the company. And I think these, just across the tech industry, we're seeing a breakdown of exclusivity as a growth mechanic because growth is not the primary factor anymore. Now it's profitability. And so if it's all about hunkering down and making a profit, then exclusivity, reducing your total audience size, it's kind of hard to justify that. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, from his point of view, he's basically saying you need exclusivity if you're a small player in the market. But you don't if you're the size of Spotify now. Now, he's saying that Spotify is in many cases the number one podcasting player already. That's by people, not by downloads. That much we can certainly say. But I thought it was interesting that literally as soon as Spotify released their figures, you saw Anil Dash posting a blog post in praise of OpenRSS and saying that OpenRSS is the best thing ever. Ernie Smith at Tedium writing that there should be something to be learned from RSS's podcast success by the rest of the media too. All of a sudden, everybody's going, "Oh, RSS, it's a fantastic thing. Where's this been for the last 20 years?"
It's been right here.
It's just I don't know. I find it interesting that all of a sudden we're seeing a bunch of people saying, "No, RSS is a good thing." Is that? Are you seeing that too?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, there's this concurrent thing that's happening that's beyond just podcasting, which is so return to blogs. I'm sure you've noticed this as well. I think you yourself left Medium, right? And went back to your own self-hosted blog. There's Taylor Lorenz, the journalist. She was blasting out some stuff today about podcasting and RSS being an open system. Like there's this big, I think there's just a general consensus of it's time to leave some of these platforms. It's not, the platforms aren't the main driver. They don't need to be, and because again, you can with exclusivity, you have to fuel that a lot of times by debt because you can't, the creator is the one that is going to get hurt with an exclusive deal because you slash their audience in half. So you have to make up for that by promising them more money. And if you can't get the money, you can't do the deal. So it's one of those things where, we've seen a lot of creators tell horror stories about going into an exclusive contract with Spotify, losing most of their audience, then being jettisoned back. The contract gets killed, and now all their subscribers are gone when they go back to OpenRSS, and they have to start from scratch. So I think the whole thing is just very, very dicey, and people feel more comfortable when they can perhaps have a smaller listener or reader base, but have broader reach.
There was always there was talk, and I tried to get the numbers, but I couldn't find the numbers. But there was talk that Brené Brown, when she moved as an exclusive to Spotify, all of a sudden, loads of people stopped buying her books because she wasn't getting the influence that she used to get on open podcasting. And I think that there's definitely something there. And X saying there that creators want a broader audience, but also sounding as if he's fixed the deals so that unless you grow the audience, unless you as a podcaster deliver the revenue, then you don't get your share of the Spotify money either. And I think that that's an interesting thing to end up seeing. So maybe they've rather redrawn how their deals work so that podcasters have to work rather harder.
Well, you just reported today about Rogan coming to Anchor, not Megaphone. I thought that was pretty interesting.
I thought that was really interesting. Of course, it's called Spotify for podcasters now.
That's right.
But I thought that was really interesting. I mean, Spotify. I asked Spotify to comment, and they haven't. But I think, from my point of view, I mean, Megaphone is the enterprise podcast host, right? They've got, dynamic ad insertion, they've got attribution, they've got demos, they've got all of this kind of stuff. Spotify for podcasting or Anchor has none of that.
None.
I mean, Spotify for podcasters serves creators of all sizes, but I'm
do you think do you think Joe had to download the Spotify for Podcast app and do the registration process and all that stuff?
I'm sure that he's done that. I wonder whether that's because. Do you think that Megaphone deals with Spotify video and maybe Anchor doesn't deal with Spotify video? And no, the other way around. So Anchor, I think, is the only one that deals with Spotify video, and Megaphone perhaps doesn't. I don't know. I don't really.
That's an interesting take. That's an interesting take because, of course, running the index, I I looked at the feed and I'm like, is this a special Anchor feed? Is this something? I mean, the biggest, not just the biggest podcasts in the world, but the biggest, sort of media thing in the world, or one of them.
Yeah.
As far as listeners, I mean, it's huge. Is there some sort of special? No, it's just a normal Anchor URL. It looks like like you might be sandwiched between a podcast of 30-second fart noises and somebody reading their high school term paper. I mean, it's like he just got a random Spotify for Podcasters URL. So it's odd. And the other thing it tells me is like first party data. Is that whole concept kind of dead now? Can we just say that downloads are good enough, and the whole idea of streaming and first party data as being just the treasure chest of advertising dollars is probably just not that true?
Well, I mean, I suppose that they're still getting first-party data from, Spotify for podcasters, I guess. Interestingly, there's two interesting things I think about the Anchor thing. Firstly, Anchor hosts still on Amazon CloudFront. And the URL of the enclosure still includes the actual URL of the MP3 itself.
How big is that bill, by the way?
Yeah, how big is that bill? Exactly. I mean, that must be a massive, great big thing. And also, so that's one thing. But also, I thought that Anchor used to make everything in AAC. Rather than MP3, but these files are most definitely in MP3 now. So clearly, there's been a change there somewhere. But yeah, no, I find it really interesting that they've gone to move to Anchor rather than to Megaphone. I'm really curious as to why that is.
It also tells me, James, that this whole move, the contract, everything. I feel like it tells me that they can't make money in podcasting without him. If it takes this deal to get to break even, and he's clearly driving a huge portion of revenue of ad buys across all of Spotify, that this tells me that they could not let him go, or else it would have been just a complete disaster.
Well, and they did say something to us the other day that the podcast saw a 45% increase in revenue last year. So, nice. I mean, so it's making money, but it's making even more money now. So,
right.
Yeah. So I find the whole thing fascinating. So, really interesting to see.
Well, moving on. Triton Digital's released their U.S. podcast report from 2023 with lots of data about podcasting last year.
Yes, and interestingly, given that what we've just been talking about, they say that Apple Podcasts gets 45% of all episode downloads and Spotify just gets 15%. I wonder how many of those are auto downloads, though. Daryl Battaglia should know a thing or two about what they found. He's SVP of Measurement, Products and Strategy for Triton Digital.
Triton Digital has been in the digital audio and podcast space for over 15 years. We offer services across streaming audio as well as podcasting. In podcasting, we have a hosting platform called Omni Studio to help you manage and distribute your content. We have a full ad tech stack to help publishers monetize their advertising. And we have measurement and analytics services to better understand the audience for podcasts. And that's where I come in, is leading our measurement strategy and products.
So you released the US podcast report for 2023. That's got data from Omni Studio in it, from Triton Podcast Metrics, from Demos Plus. Some really good data in there. What were the big findings from your point of view?
The biggest finding, I think, always is podcast growing. And what we found is it's grown each of the last 2 years. We computed to a 12% growth in monthly podcast listeners over the last 2 years. And what we saw was that came across all segments of the population, different age groups, male, female. We really saw a broadening of the audience. while podcasting over indexes for a younger audience, for a little bit more male audience. We actually saw more growth from the over 55 group in the United States and more growth from females. So we're seeing a broadening of the audience, and we're really seeing that podcasting appeals to everyone. And it, I think, really is exciting for the future that the podcast audience can continue to grow, and there's really no ceiling that it can. Obviously, there's all different types of podcasts, and it can appeal to all different types of people.
Indeed, it's super exciting. I wonder whether your report said anything about YouTube. It's certainly all of the talk of the podcast industry over the last year.
It did. We did a pretty in-depth comparison of YouTube and Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well. What we saw is that YouTube is the number one platform that people say they use the most to consume podcasts. 33.5% of monthly podcast listeners said they use YouTube the most, and that has been growing. 47% of their listeners said they started consuming podcasts in the last year, so a lot of the new listeners are coming from them. But we also saw a lot of differences in the demographics of the audience for YouTube as compared to Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because, and this is data from Demos Plus, and some really interesting data about the demographics of the various platforms. So Spotify listeners being younger, Apple listeners being richer, YouTube listeners being more male and a bit less money. What should we learn from that for podcasting?
I think it helps with distribution strategies. I think it helps to understand who your audience is and help to inform your content strategies and help to inform your advertising strategies as well, to understand more about not only who your listeners are as a whole, which Demos Plus helps to do, but to understand some of the differences amongst platforms.
Yeah, and I guess it also shows some of the benefits of Triton podcast metrics in that the data that you get from Spotify is only data of Spotify listeners. And similarly, the data that you get from Apple is only from Apple listeners. And they're not necessarily the same types of people, are they?
No, they're not. So as you mentioned, YouTube, really all of those platforms are younger than the general population. However, we saw that Spotify was the youngest, whereas YouTube was a little bit older. We saw Apple Podcasts was more female, while YouTube was more male. Differences in income as well. Apple Podcasts audience on average was had a higher income. So there are certainly differences amongst those platforms, which were interesting to learn more about.
Yeah, it's fascinating bits of data. The other two bits that I saw, which I found interesting, firstly, the top shows by purchase intent. So, and again, I'm guessing that this is from Demos Plus as well. So if, for example, you want to reach shows listened to by people who are interested in switching their wireless provider, which seems a very niche thing, then apparently Wow in the World or Fantasy Football Today are two big shows for that. This is really focused information, isn't it? And really useful for advertisers as well.
Right. With our podcast metrics Demos Plus solution, we're able to understand the profile of the audience across podcasts of all sizes. So age and gender, other demographic insights, their purchase behaviors and intent, their political affiliation, their other media usage. And so there's a wide variety of purchase intent data, and different audience segments are important for different advertisers. So if you are a wireless provider, you definitely want advertising shows that will do a good job of reaching people who are in the market to switch wireless providers. And in the report, first of all, we highlighted a few examples of different genres at the genre level, but within our ranker of the top 100 shows for the year, we also highlighted for different audience segments and different purchase intents and demographics, what were the top 3 shows that over-index the most for those segments or would reach that audience most efficiently.
Yeah, and I think particularly helpful for an election year, which of course it is. I wonder if anybody's spotted this yet in the US. Particularly useful in terms of that because being able to focus on specific age ranges and also which ways people are going to vote as well.
Absolutely. It's not surprising, of course, that different types of podcasts that have political content are going to be geared towards a certain political affiliation. That part's not surprising, but it provides that insight for podcasts of all genres and definitely helps with political candidates and their advertising campaigns in determining what podcasts could be a fit for them.
Yeah, and I particularly, it's always nice seeing data where you can go, okay, that makes perfect sense. For example, the podcast listened to by people with the most amount of household income are podcasts like Planet Money or How I Built This with Guy Raz. I mean, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? It's really nice seeing actually data that you go, yeah, that's absolutely right.
Right. I mean, even if they know that this is the case because of the subject matter of their podcast, to have actual data with actual numbers that is third-party proof of the case and helps quantify it is a big help for them as they try and find advertiser partners for their shows.
So what do you think that the US podcast report tells the podcast industry? What should we take away from that?
Better insight into who the audience is and how that differs across genres, across shows, across platforms with download measurement. That data doesn't, you mentioned, like Spotify can provide it for their audience to a certain extent, maybe not to the same level of depth. But so I think that's been a gap in the past for the industry, is really understanding who the audience is and how it differs across the whole landscape. And so that's really a big part of it, is to shed insight into that, share insights into that. And a lot of it is more at the aggregate level, but we provide this type of data to our clients at the individual show level or for any aggregation of shows as well.
So the report is free. Where can people get hold of it?
They can go to tritonrankers.com. On there, you can see our podcast rankers, which are monthly in every country, but there's a link below under the resource section to be able to download the report. It's about 30 plus pages of all different insights that hopefully people will find really useful. And I know the team here has put a lot of work into it, so we're excited to put it out there.
Yeah, super helpful stuff. It's really good to talk to my friends at Triton. Daryl, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it.
That was Daryl Battaglia from Triton Digital.
There's some really interesting data in there, and interesting data both from Omni Studio and from their own enterprise podcasting host, but also from the Triton rankers as well around the world as well. I always find it really good when large podcast companies do that kind of thing, Dave.
I read through some of the report, and there's some, just as usual, some of this stuff, I find it hard to reconcile some of the things in the report, because they say in there that, you've got that huge advantage that Apple has over Spotify. But then in the other section where they do the survey, it says Apple's at 15% when they say, the question was, which platform do you use most often to listen to podcasts? And the respondents said that Apple's 15%, Spotify 25%. So
yeah, and YouTube even more.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I'm following. The survey says one thing, the downloads, I guess, or the trackers say a different thing. I'm not sure how to reconcile those two.
I've never understood that, and it's really difficult to report on it, because you're there going, I guess you can turn around and say the podcast app that people are most using, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the app which is delivering the most amount of downloads. Mm-hmm. But I also wonder whether or not it's a deal about Apple's automated downloads as well. And I wonder what the story is there. And I would love to dive more deeply into what's actually automated and what isn't. And maybe that's something that OP3 can actually help us with.
Yeah, and that's the other thing it talked about was the long tail of podcasting that is 76% of podcasts. And, that's a number that people have been just licking their chops to try to monetize for so long. And, I'm just not sure it's doable. I'm sure you can break off some of that with programmatic type advertising, but when we see the huge margins of error, like when such a big drop when Apple downloads changed their, Apple Podcast changed their download algorithm. It's just when that kind of swing can happen. If it happens on on a show with 1 million downloads, 20% is one thing. 20% on a show with 10,000 downloads is something completely different. And so I'm not sure that that long tail can ever be, because it's just not nobody. It seems like nobody wants that.
Yeah.
As far as the ad buyers.
No, I'm fascinated to, I'm really interested to find out how many more of the Apple downloads numbers are actually automated and what that means for the industry. Because, talking with some people in the podcast industrial complex about their downloads and things, you can see that there's some fear in their eyes when they're saying, how's it impacted you, and they're going, oh, it's fine, really,
Yeah, right.
They're really kind of, I've seen some of the numbers, and some of the numbers, there are some large podcast publishers which are down 30%, 40%. And they'll be having to pay make goods for that. They'll be having to, go back to their advertisers and saying, well, yeah, but this isn't real numbers. And then you've got Todd saying, there's been no change at all. And I'm not sure. I don't know. It's just a weird one. But then you see, numbers from Buzzsprout as an example, where Spotify has been down significantly. But that doesn't appear to be the case on some other podcast platforms. So it's just really hard to report on, I think.
Yeah, the Spotify number being down, that has been a weird one, because, I'm not sure. We saw, and you published the indexes stats of podcasts that publish new episodes and the total count on that. We saw that going down through most of 2023. And then it sort of hit bottom around early January, and now it's just been on this slow march up. And so we've had this nice, it seems like every week it's 1.5%, 2% up, and things are improving, and shows are producing more episodes now, and we've seen this nice little gradual recovery in the total overall number of shows that are producing new episodes. And I think you're right. It is hard to make this to translate these kinds of things into money, because I did notice that in the Triton report they listed the top 20 podcasts overall in their rankings, and NPR has 6 of the shows in the top 20, but they laid off like almost the entire podcast group. So clearly, these things don't mate,
No, exactly. And of course, their numbers are, depending on which numbers you look at, their numbers are participating publishers only, which is always a thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Some really interesting numbers coming out of that. And talking about really interesting numbers, lots of very large numbers to do with AI and fundraising.
Yeah, lots of AI companies are getting funded. Everybody's getting money. Podcastle got $13.5 million. Last week we heard from Wondercraft, who got $3 million. Dexa raised $6 million. Audio Stack raised $3.2 million. Everybody's just getting a piece of the action.
Yeah, it's just like so much money. It seems that in order for you to make a ton of cash in terms of funding, all you have to do is say AI. So I'm wondering, obviously, when Podcast Index is going to be doing some AI. You already use AI, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Never.
And machine learning as well, which was last year's catchphrase, wasn't it?
Right. Yeah. And blockchain the year before that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Robotic process automation. This it just keeps going back and back and back. So the odd narrative of AI being able to fix podcast search and discovery and that kind of thing. That's a new one on me. I don't see how that's possible. But people now, things have changed. It seems like people have gone from from AI as podcast improvement to AI as podcast search and discovery. And I'm not sure how that, I don't know how to make that leap, but I guess we'll see what people come up with.
Yeah, I think, AI is being used an awful lot. Our sponsor Buzzsprout has AI that will generate, entire titles and episode show notes and everything else if I really want it to. The Dexa one is interesting. So Dexa is essentially looking at the entire contents of your podcast back catalogue. And although they've just announced something with Huberman Lab, I don't even know if that's how you pronounce it. Huberman?
I think so. Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, Huberman.
Yeah. Well, so they've just announced that, but they've actually had one with Jordan Harbinger for quite some time. If you want to take a peek at that, it's jordan.dexa.ai. And, that's a fascinating thing in that you go into this thing, you can ask Jordan Harbinger anything you want about anything that he might have spoken about, and it comes back with, information on, some of his guests, information on shows to go and have a listen to, but also information on, on the advertisers. You can go in and you can ask for an Athletic Greens, discount code.
And away you go. That sounds great. Well. Yeah. Now, this kind of thing I can see. There's a lot of AI just hype cycle trash that's out there, but that's actually a really cool thing. And I can see that if you take a back catalog of a particular podcast and say, okay, look, I've done 900 episodes of a podcast. I don't even remember what I said, in all of these. And I don't remember stories that we've gone over and clips that we've played and all these. If you can pump all those transcripts and all that data into a large language model and get out something that's easy to search and is even proactive in telling you as you're prepping for the show, you just typed this word into your show notes. Well, here you've talked about this 6 shows ago. I can see that now. That's valuable. That I can some of these, and that's the I think that's the complex thing around AI in general, is that it's hard right now because the hype cycle is just so fire that it's so difficult to figure out which of these things is actually a useful product and which one is just somebody trying to jump on the bandwagon.
Yeah, it's just nonsense. So Audio Stack raising 3.2 million. They are the people who do automated voices, and I think I used one of the automated voices a couple of weeks ago with and it was an Australian ad. And the automated voice, to be honest, sounded pretty good. If you want to make automated ads that essentially promote, news headlines and stuff like that, then that's quite a nice idea, I think. But let me play a little clip of one here.
Many Australian cities are bracing for their hottest days in years, including Western Sydney, as experts warn of dangerous conditions in some areas.
Now, that's a completely automatic voice, but you wouldn't. I don't think I would have guessed that was an automatic voice.
No, I wouldn't have picked that out. I think if I heard it long enough, if there was enough, if it kept going, probably you'd start to get suspicious.
Yeah, but the ad is only a 30-second thing, and it's basically that's the headline. I mean, if that was a headline, go and find out more at this website. So I can see that there being something there, but still. But yes, whether or not that'll help with podcast discovery, who knows? But OSHA, our French friends, have come up with something clever.
Yeah, they've launched a podcast search optimization control panel. The tool's aimed at ensuring its podcasts reach the #1 slot in Apple Podcasts and Spotify search results.
What do you think of that, running a podcast index yourself?
I think search within podcasting is incredibly difficult for so many reasons. And the number one reason with search and audio, it doesn't matter if you have a transcript or not. Having the text really doesn't help you that much.
Really?
So if we look at it, well, it depends on what you're trying to find. So sometimes having the text of all the episodes and everything makes the job even worse, because so let's take search, sort of the pinnacle of search that we all think of, and that's Google. The magic of Google is the backlink, is measuring the number of inbound links to a page in order to rank the results. And podcasting doesn't have anything like that. There's no linkage between a podcast and another podcast, or a podcast and some general topic. There's no way to measure those, because without PageRank, Google search is not what it is. That's the secret sauce. And since you don't have anything that's sort of like analogous to that within podcasting, you just have to go purely based on just text. And there's so much text out there that it just pollutes everything down to nothing. It's an odd narrative to say that you could boost search results into the number one slot in Apple and Spotify. I wonder what magic sauce they're using to make that happen.
I mean, I think quite a lot of it is just that most podcasts are pretty bad at the metadata that goes with them, and the amount of, Joe Rogan, for example, Joe Rogan's entire description in the description field is the official Joe Rogan podcast. I think that's it. I mean, it used to be ramblings from a guy in Mines, which made even less sense. But
in fairness, I'm not sure how you would explain this show. Like a guy that interviews other people.
Yes,
there's not a whole lot to say about it. It's pretty random.
Yeah, no, exactly. So and I wonder whether. It's an issue of it's an issue of just the metadata which is out there. The official podcast of comedian Joe Rogan. That's literally all it says.
So helpful.
Yeah.
So
maybe there's something there. I had not thought about backlinks and things because, of course, as you so rightly say, there are no backlinks, because there's a backlink maybe to the Apple Podcasts page now. There's a backlink to the Spotify page, but there's a backlink to the website, and there's a backlink to the other website, to his new Anchor website, which looks entertaining. So so I find that's a really interesting point. Hence why a discovery mechanism like Podroll and things like that are really interesting and useful and helpful. I was talking with the folks from RSS, and they promised me Podroll within the next couple of months. So
Hey, I want to put it on our homepage on the index. It's time to move off the completely useless, not helpful to anybody, random.
Oh yeah, the random
carousel,
one, which is usually a sermon, isn't it?
It's always sermonaudio.com.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
So is OSHA, are they just fixing show notes and description fields? Is that primarily what this is?
I think it is making sure that you are using the right keywords in the right description and show notes and everything else. Okay. I think it really is purely that. My talking with Maxime, as I did a while back, he is he's looked at rankings in Apple Podcasts and in Spotify. He's got a ton of data behind him to show how this works and how this works well. We should probably get him back on to talk about this specifically. But it's basically it's SEO, just the same way as you would use SEO. I mean, there is a reason why the Podnews Daily, that show now has in the description, it mentions Joe Rogan, it mentions a few other large shows just to get it in there.
Oh, look at you doing SEO, James.
I know, exactly. But it's really interesting, and I do think that Podroll particularly, that is your backlinks, isn't it? But it's your backlinks from the industry or from the community. It's not necessarily backlinks from audiences. So perhaps there's something else that we need to build there.
Right. Which I think, honestly is probably better at this point in the game, or at least something that we can work with, because once you introduce tens of millions of listeners, then you just have chaos on your hands. If it's just podcasters recommending other podcasts, that seems like a higher signal, amongst the noise for now.
Yeah.
So did you go to Podfest this past week, James?
I did not go to Podfest for two reasons. Firstly, because it's a long way away. And secondly, it's a bit too Florida for me. Although I am going to Orlando in May. So I'm going to speak at a Christian radio conference there. So that should be fun. I have a form which I was supposed to fill out 2 days ago, telling them exactly what it is I'm going to be saying. So I should probably get to doing that. I guess you weren't at Podfest either. Is Podcast Movement in Dallas the only big one that you've been to, or have you been to others?
Yeah, I've been to two podcast movements. I don't. Because of my day job, from roughly January to May is almost impossible to do any travel. So I always miss Podfest and I miss Podcast Movement Evolutions. So I've only been to the other podcast movement.
Yeah, the big one. The big one. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Because, you like in your day job, you'll be, dealing with W-9 forms. The amount of W-9 forms I've had to fill in and send to people, I don't even know what they are.
Give us all your highly personal numbers and Social Security and all this stuff so that we can send you a 1099.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you get 1099? I guess you do get 1099 since you're incorporated here in the U.S.
I'm sure that the person that deals with my accounts is, yes, absolutely doing that. Absolutely doing that. Yes, I've got no idea about any of this stuff. It used to be, I worked for a Canadian radio company about 3 or 4 years ago. And I ended up paying more Canadian tax than I did Australian tax, which was
nice.
Which was very strange. Very strange. There I was, helping the good people of British Columbia. What who knows? But anyway, talking about Podfest, which we were until we went off on one. I spoke with Claire White-Brown from the Creativity Found podcast. She did go to Podfest, so I asked her what it was like, and I was interested in whether it was her first big event.
It was. So I've been to a number of events in London, and when I saw this one in Orlando's a bit easier for us Brits to get to and a bit more affordable. So, I decided to bite the bullet and go for it and go see what podcast conferences are like in the US. I hear a lot about US podcasting generally, and I have a number of US guests and listeners, so I wanted to go over and go to a big event.
And did you pay for the tickets, or how did you get hold of those?
Well, you see, luckily, and I was kind of a bit hopeful. So I booked my flights and I booked my hotel, and I was hoping that my lovely host Buzzsprout, because I'd heard them do this before, would have some tickets to give away. And yes, they did. So on the day they announced that on Buzzcast, I was in the car and I rushed back home and said, right, I've got to get on to customer support, speak with Brian. And yes, so my creator pass was given to me by Buzzsprout, which, considering the costs going into a big trip like this was really very helpful and much appreciated on my part.
Well, they are our sponsor as well, so I can never say any bad things about Buzzsprout.
Not that you would want to. There's never a bad thing to say about them.
No, indeed. And I noticed that you met Brian from customer support while you were there.
I did.
Jordan and Alban, I noticed, not Kevin.
I didn't meet Kevin. No, I was hoping to meet Kevin at the party, but it was just too damn busy and he was just too damn popular.
Yeah, well, there you go. So what did you think that Podfest would be like, first of all?
Well, I didn't really know, but I had a little bit of a clue from you, actually, James, which was quite nice because I wrote to you about it and you said about you felt it was grassroots, which is right up my street because I'm an indie podcaster. You know, it was an idea I had. The wonderfulness about podcasting is you can just do it at little expense. You don't need to do as you're told. You can run the show how you want to, put it out how you want to. It can be hours and hours, or it can be 10 minutes, all of that kind of thing. But I do feel sometimes going to some of the events in the UK a bit lost in that area, in that there's a lot of big business around it. So I was quite happy to think that Podfest may be more indie podcasters like myself. I certainly know a lot of indie podcasters here in the UK, but not necessarily feel that going to an event I'm going to meet lots of them. But then this was exactly what happened at Podfest. It was so lovely. Obviously, I went completely on my own. I didn't know anyone when I got there, apart from Brian and Jordan, obviously, through digital communication. But it was a case of, you know, being able to say to someone, so what's your show? And more often than not, they did have a show, and it was their idea, and they were doing this show for this reason, or they were promoting it for this reason. So it did feel very much, I was very comfortable there. Oh, it's so cheesy, but I was amongst my people.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing. I found from Podfest, and I went a number of years ago, but I found it very American. And certainly there was a thing called speed dating, which terrified me. Was there that when you went?
Yes, yeah. And I've been calling it speed dating since, but it's speed networking, really.
Right.
And I know what you mean, James, because I am very British. I didn't find it very American at all. There was one thing I videoed where a very lovely man was doing some singing, and I was like, oh, crikey, this is a bit American. Sent that home to my family. But generally, I didn't. And I really just found it very friendly, very ordinary, if you know what I mean. It wasn't all whoop whoop, you know, big American stuff. The people, the individuals that I were meeting there was so friendly. They were so keen to explain things to me that I didn't know as a Brit, and vice versa, to ask me about stuff that's different in the UK, and the parties and things, and talking to people. So I would be one to notice if something was a bit, as we would say, American, and I didn't find it overly that way at all.
Good. Well, that's a good thing. And lots of informal meetups. So obviously you must have been at the Buzzsprout party, I'm imagining, with the balloons. From what I understand, I was listening to Buzzcast and listening all about that. But there were lots of informal meetups as well, I think.
Yeah, and that was lovely as well. So we had the app, and within the app, obviously, you've got your agenda on there. You can try to fathom out what you want to go to when, because there's such a lot of talks going on. I mean, obviously, you can buy recordings of it, but it's really good to be in the room with the speaker, but also with other people in the room that are interested in this topic, and you can speak to them. But yeah, definitely there's a really lovely, good sized space with round tables that was just always open and just always free for meeting up. There were people meeting in the hallways. I mean, I went to an organised one which was arranged by Jen Hardy, and it was aimed at podcasters over the age of 50, and that was really lovely to actually speak individually to some people there, find out about their shows and vice versa. And then during the rest of the conference, when you're wandering about and you're in the halls, you've got people that you've already met to say hello to. And I know there were lots of other groups like that. And I'm going to be a bit American here, James, in your niche, or niche, as we say here. But there were, lots of informal meetups that you could go to meet other people like yourself doing the same kind of show as you, or, having the same interests, which I thought was really lovely as well. Now,
you went to one of the talks that you went to was all about podcasting 2.0 with Todd, and apparently he used one of Sam's slides, which Sam will be delighted about.
He did.
Delighted about. Was there lots of talk about podcasting 2.0, or was it still a bit sort of, we're not quite sure what it is?
Yeah, it is still a bit, we're not quite sure what it is. I forgot to take a photo of Todd with Sam's slide up, so I apologise for that, Sam. I was too busy listening. But yeah, I think there was more because I'm quite very keen on all of this stuff, very interested in it.
You do value for value, don't you?
Yes. I'm loving that. And I loved, I'm not blowing smoke here, James, but I did love your description of the fairground tokens, because I do think people are a bit frightened of, like, what's a sat? Oh my God, do I have to, put money over in my wallet and blah, blah, blah. And you described it as fairground tokens, which I think is perfect, because in my wallet at the moment, I have, I think, a grand total of 16,000 sats, which I'm very pleased about. But
Wow.
I haven't put any money into my wallet myself. I've been able to boost and connect with other podcasts by using the sats that I've earned just by listening. I met a chap in the queue for the bar. You always meet the best people in queues for the bar, who gave me 10,000 sats, because we were talking about podcasting 2.0 and value for value. But I felt that more of the people I was speaking to were aware of it, knew the term. And the point that they're then at is then really understanding what it means. And to my mind, how easy it is to take advantage of it, to use it. But I know you and Sam have been talking about it's kind of down to the apps to take on the mantle and include some of those.
Yeah, I mean, the hard sort of education and all of that kind of stuff is always important.
Yeah, and just make it acceptable and just understandable, and it's not scary.
So what was the most valuable thing you learnt? I have a theory about conferences and events like Podfest or Evolutions from Podcast Movement, which I'm going to. I have a theory that actually you go away, it's 3 days of sort of fun and chatting to people, but you probably go away with two big things that you've learnt. And those big things are actually worth enough, in my opinion, for you to have actually gone there. Were there some big things that you learnt, or was it just meeting lots of people, making lots of contacts and all that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say... So I came away, and I'm going to be a really annoying guest, and I'm not going to put it into two things that I've learned, because that's just, I haven't got the brain space yet to actually hone that in. But I came away with notes, not loads and loads of notes. Another thing I like about these kind of events is sometimes they can help reiterate to yourself that you're on the right track, that
absolutely
you know things and you are doing things in a good way that you want to do. So that I find very valuable. As you've already said, meeting people is very valuable. I think this is the first conference I've been to where I've actually come back with contact details and got back in touch with those people, whether for friendly chat, whether to actually talk about guest swaps and just sharing information. Certainly not a lot of sharing information. For example, there was some, the inevitable chat about AI, and some of us have been chatting amongst ourselves and sharing our experiences of what we're trying within AI, for example, show notes, etc. So the connecting with people. But I did come back with some notes and the plan in my head, which is good for me, because everything can be a bit fuddled up in there with all the information you've taken on, but a plan in my head to actually look at what I've taken from it, find the most important things that I want to actually implement. And there are a couple of things I want to implement, but to schedule those in a long, slow process. So I'm going to say, like, for this month, I'm going to do this small thing. And next month, I'm going to do this small thing, so that I can actually do them all and they don't all get rushed together and then probably, by the wayside or what have you. So a little bit of just slowing down, looking at it all and taking on the ones that I really want to do, giving myself the time to actually do them.
So what's your advice for people going to these types of events?
Well, so the other thing I wanted to say actually is that I am a very good networker. I am absolutely happy to go to events like these completely on my own and go and talk to people. I have no problem with that whatsoever. Not everybody does. Also, I think people often think that they're going to go to these events and it's going to be cringy, or there's going to be, we haven't talked about the speed dating. Which wasn't cringy. But, that it's going to be really difficult for them. At this particular event, there was a table and it had some extra things you could stick onto your lanyard For example, my pronouns are, or I'm an introvert, or I'm an extrovert, which I think possibly, I didn't use any of those. But if you felt you needed, a bit of help when you're going to be talking to strangers.
It's a bit American, isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say that, and then I wasn't going to say that. Yeah, I did think that. Even if you don't feel that you're very confident in going to things on your own, we're often told we need to be selling ourselves and selling our product and blah, 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 selling our show. Don't feel it has to be like that. Just be human. Majority of people at these events are human, but you know what I mean. They're just ordinary human beings, and it can be easier to just talk to people than you think. And I personally make better connections when I speak to a person in real life.
Yeah. Well, everybody is in the same boat as well, aren't they? Which is important.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I would add to that is plan ahead, plan the different things that you're going to go and see. If you're coming to Evolutions at Podcast Movement, make sure you go and see Amy Poehler and the ridiculous English guy that will talk for 10 minutes prior to Amy Poehler. He's very good. You should go and see him. Planning is a good thing, because otherwise, actually, you're not going to get the best out of some of the speakers that you end up seeing there. I think. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I think it's going to save on your stress while you're there as well. I definitely went through the app, went through the agenda, ticked off the ones on the agenda I wanted to go to. Didn't necessarily always go to that ones. Sometimes I changed my mind, but have a good understanding of what's there, and then you're not going to be stressed rushing between rooms, and you're not going to be stressed about changing your mind because you've got a good idea of what's going on. I think that's a very good idea, James. Yeah, good point.
Yes, especially the English guy before Amy Poehler. And the final question is, what is the name of your podcast and why should we listen?
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, so my podcast is called Creativity Found, and it's born out of my own experience, although I didn't realise that until I'd been making the show for quite a few episodes. But basically, I speak with people who have found or refound their creativity later in life. So we talk a lot about the hiatus period when in sensible, everyday, normal, all of those in bunny ears life, creativity is put to the bottom of a pile, and how people have found their way back and how they benefit from that in their life now. So there's a lot of personal journal, there's a lot of well-being, there's a lot of good advice on trying things and not worrying if you're not perfect at them. So, and it's from all sorts of creative disciplines. So my guests are from all over the world, all sorts of creative disciplines, and have so many different stories.
Well, thank you, Buzzsprout, for the tickets, and thank you, Claire, for your time today.
Thank you so much. It's been fabulous.
Claire Waite-Brown from the Creativity Found podcast.
Yeah, it was nice to hear that she was given 10,000 sats by a man in the queue for the bar. This is how things work, isn't it, I think?
When you get into the weird underbelly of Bitcoin stuff, you never know who's going to just give you sats. It may be some random guy at a bar. That's how that works. App, show me your app and I'll show you mine, and you'll get 10,000 sats.
Say, can I have a look at your QR code?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but it was good to hear that. She went to Todd. She went to hear Todd talking about that, and value for value is something that Claire has been doing for a while on her show and everything else. And she liked fairground tokens, which I was very, very pleased about.
Yes, congratulations.
I don't know quite what you think about fairground tokens. I'm sure that Adam disapproves, as he disapproves of most things that I say. But
I think all analogies are fair game. They all fall down in some way or another. It's very hard to make analogies to any of this stuff.
Yeah.
I like how she throws in blah blah blah, because that's basically when you start talking about Bitcoin and podcasting and sats. There's always going to be a little bit of blah, blah, blah in there.
Yeah. Put money over into my wallet and blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
Let's look at some other events. Podcasting is coming to South by Southwest, which is in, I was going to say it's in your neck of the woods. It's in Adam's neck of the woods, isn't it?
Austin.
Kind of, yes. Early March. And then, of course, there's Evolutions, which I'm going to, Sam's going to. There's Podfronts as well, which they're doing to put together podcasting's top publishers with brands, agencies and buyers. I'm not going to that bit, but I'm sure it's going to be very good. The New Zealand Podcasting Summit 2024 has been announced on May the 11th in Auckland, and the Podcast Show in London, which I am going to, as is Sam, the 22nd and 23rd of May. Looking forward to that. Such a good event, and it should be very excellent this year. There's a creators section, which they've not done before. So hopefully we'll find out more about that. And there are more events, both paid for and free, at Podnews. Virtual events or events in a place with people. And if you're organising something, you can tell the world about it. It's free to be listed, podnews.net/events.
The tech stuff on the Podnews Weekly Review.
Yes, it's the stuff you'll find every Monday in the Podnews newsletter. Here's where we do all of the tech talk, and I'm delighted that you're here, Dave, because normally I am basically taking the posts that you have posted on Mastodon and then rewriting those, and then Sam and I talk about them. So, so cut out the middleman.
Yeah, I basically did the same thing. I went and looked at my email and looked at the namespace and hey, here we go. What's going on? And the first thing that popped out was Eric PP. And so Helipad, that's the thing many of us use to see our boostergrams and get those messages and that kind of thing. I've pretty much turned over the source code of Helipad over to Eric PP. He's kind of running with that full steam now. I just got so much going on that it was great to see him pick that up.
Yeah. And
he's got a new release. He's got this lets you reply. So if somebody sends you a boostergram, you can reply back and send sats back and a message. There's a sent tab to let you see all your sent boosts when you're replying. He's got password protection in there. You can see your automated boosts. And if you run an Umbrel or Start9, you can run it on there, or you can run it on any machine. He's got new app icons for Podcast Guru and True Fans and LN Beats. Lots of great stuff.
And as I talk, I thought I'll go into Umbrel and I'll just check whether the update is available, and it is.
Oh, really?
There it is. Added missing user agent header when calling the Podcast Index API. You'll be pleased about that. And various other entertaining things. Excellent. Let's hit the update button on that then. Now, what could possibly go wrong?
I'm not going to do that because I'm podcasting from my Umbrel, so I'm not going to risk this at all. Terrible decision.
Yes. Nobody wants that.
No.
Nobody wants that. So that is a very cool thing, and it's nice to see Eric doing a ton of work with that, which is nice. Phase 7 of the namespace. So the namespace is lots of additional functions and additional tools and things for podcasting in general. Mm-hmm. You have set a closing date, haven't you? Which is sometime in the future.
It is. It's
why is that?
June 1st. We sort of intentionally slowed down things. We were going, when we first year and a half, 2 years of the namespace development, we were just going at a lightning speed. And that's just not great for anybody to keep up a pace like that. And I think it was good to slow down the introduction of new tags and that kind of thing so that hosts could catch up, apps could catch up. And because these development cycles, it takes a long time. So we intentionally kind of slowed everything down and just stopped the frantic pace. And I feel like now going forward, it probably makes sense to have roughly a 6-month cadence on bringing out new phases. So a phase is we sort of have an idea for a bunch of features and tags that we want, that the community has said, hey, I want this. And then we sort of try to hash them out, and we discuss them, debate them, try to find problems with them, all the normal things you do as you're developing new things. And then at the end of the period, when that phase closes, we just do say, okay, where are we at? Is this tag good enough? Does it need more work? If it does, we'll just kick it to the next phase. If this other tag or this other feature enhancement maybe it's ready not on June 1st. Maybe it's ready April 1st. Well, we go ahead and do it. It doesn't mean we have to wait, but it does mean that it's nice to have sort of a 6-month expectation that we're going to have a new set of features to target for a specific date, and that I think helps everybody have sort of a goal in mind for what dates and they want to hit, so that we don't just sit around and not. So we're not going too fast, and we're also not going too slow.
What's your favorite new feature in this next phase? That's a nasty question to ask, isn't it?
I don't know if I have a favorite. I would say that probably publisher feeds and the publisher medium make a lot of sense to me. But then I think, do you want to explain what those are, how those work?
Yeah,
sure. So this is sort of, again, like a backlink type of situation or a pod roll, but it takes a little bit of a different approach. So if I'm a podcast network or even a podcaster that has 4 different podcasts, well, then maybe I want to group my podcasts together in a way where it's easier to discover all the shows that belong to me. You could think of this sort of like as an open version of Apple's channels feature in Apple Podcasts. So you can say, all right, I have 4 podcasts, and I'm going to have a feed, and the feed is going to have a medium of publisher. And so the only 4 things in that feed are going to be links to the other feeds. And you can go in reverse as well. So each podcast feed has a link back up to the publisher feed. So it's sort of a 2-way street. I can start at the publisher feed and find all the shows that publisher creates, or I can find one of their feeds, go back up the chain to the publisher feed, and then discover all the other ones. So it's sort of a 2-way street, and you get some verification there too. I'm not just saying that I'm part of this publisher. The publisher's feed also says, yes, this is part of this publisher.
Right. Yeah. So one links to one, and the other links to the other, and that sort of helps you. And that's different from Podroll, because Podroll you can link to anything you like. So this show links to the Buzzcast show because of our sponsor and also because we like it, and so that's all fine. But that's very different from this, which is very much more focused on, here are all of the shows that this publisher has produced.
Yes, that's right. And on the medium front, we've also got a proposal for adding a new medium of course. So that would be like some kind of teaching course or an educational type course.
Right.
Video.
So we've got mediums of audiobooks, I think. We've got mediums of
music. Yep.
Obviously podcasts and now courses.
Yeah. And I think these make sense, to distinguish between, because obviously we've done tons of stuff with music over the last year and a half. But I think audiobooks make a ton of sense. We're already talking. I talked in an email today with somebody who's doing some audiobook work, and they're looking to publish those in a podcast feed. And so as we distinguish between these different medium types, I think it makes sense to go slow and pick, choose wisely. And course makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, that it just seems sort of intuitive that would be a thing that you would want to look for at a high level.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a bunch of sense. There's more details, of course, on that if you go in through now. How could people find more details on these new features? Well, I wonder.
It's super easy, Jay. You just Google for podcast namespace, click on the GitHub repo, and then go to the discussions tab, and then click on the phases tab. It could not be simpler.
Sounds super easy to me. I have a feeling that podcasting2.org should have a link somewhere to make it even easier.
I think so too.
Boostergram Corner
on the Podnews Weekly Review.
Yes, our favourite time of the week. It's Boostergram Corner. And yes, lots of boosts. As ever, we get boosts for the Podnews Daily as well as boosts for this very show. And do you want to read the first one? The first one out is a bit weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 1,024 sats, and it just says, great show.
Great show. Excellent. Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, random anonymous person. The good news is now that with the new helipad, I can hit reply on that one. And I can, so I will do that and ask them who they are for next time.
Who are you?
Who are you? Thanks, random person, for your 1K boost. But who are you? 10,000 sats from Adam Curry, who is very grumpy at me again. This time because I linked to a video of your board meeting from last week. And how it shows on the new Apple Podcasts app, and forgot, of course, that I'd left variable speed on, so it was at 1.25%. And he was there. He called it atrocious and triggering. Speed listening is not healthy, people. Sorry, Adam.
Well, at least he paid you 10,000 sats for the
at least he paid me 10,000 sats for that. And I have to say, I didn't realise, because I've not been using an iPhone, I didn't realise that Apple iPhones don't have skip silence on them. Okay. Yeah, so all of the podcast apps that I've ever used has had skip silence, and all of a sudden I discover that Apple Podcasts is missing this obvious basic feature. And I'm there going, I really, really miss that, but still, there we are.
I used to have all that turned on. I used to have all of it. I used to have the increased speed, the gap skipper, all of that. I turned it all off a couple of years ago. It was baking my brain. I couldn't handle it.
Well, there are some podcasts that I can only listen to if I turn all of the skip silences off,
including ours, evidently. That's
well, I mean, Pocket Casts lets you choose them by show, so you can have a specific setting for, I don't know, the new media show, and a specific setting for the Podcasting 2.0 show, and those are different in Pocket Casts, but I'm being a good boy and I'm just using the Apple Podcasts app for now.
Who do you listen to at a faster speed, us or New Media Show?
Oh, the New Media Show has all of the silent skipping turned on.
2x,
and everything else. And it's, I have to be, I love that show. When it's a normal show, and I would completely agree, by the way, with what Adam was saying, it's just not the same without Todd.
It's not
the same.
Don't eat me, Todd Cochrane.
Just not the same without Todd. So I'm hoping that Todd comes back on that show relatively soon. No, it's good. 1,000 sats from Andrew. Now, he did tell me how to pronounce his surname, and I've completely forgotten. Do you want to have a go?
Yeah, Andrew Grummett.
Andrew Grummett. There you go. 1,000.
Yeah, he one of Adam's employees at Pod Show.
Oh, well, there you go. Let's see.
One of the first, I think. I think he was perhaps one of the foundational employees at Mevio.
I had no idea. These newcomers in the industry.
Whippersnappers.
No idea.
22 sats from Gene Bean. He says, welcome to the world of Apple phone users, James.
Yes, it's been an entertainment. There's another blog on the way, I'm sure. 22 sats from Mere Mortals, from Kyrin. He says, here's some fresh goss you might not know. The swankiest, and then he uses a phrase that I have no idea. Bougiest?
Bougiest, like bourgeois.
Oh, okay. The swankiest, bougiest gym I've ever checked out is Total Fusion Newstead. Kyrin has no. Karen and I, he talks about gyms, and I no interest in gyms. But anyway,
you have to do work in
the reason why he says it is they have a podcast studio on their ground floor. So that's nice.
That's weird.
Sam is here next week, and I've just booked a proper podcast studio for next week.
Oh, you sprung for the big boy, huh?
Yeah. So I will not be. I'll be in the pod in West End, and I will not be in this slightly echoey room. So that's good news.
Oh, so Sam's back next week.
So Sam is here in Brisbane next week.
in honor of Sam, I didn't mention it, but I'm doing the show from the bubble bath with my red wine in honor of Sam. I'm holding down the fort, Sam.
Yeah, because that's what he always does.
Yeah.
And then 500 sats, inexplicable. 500 sats from now. Is this Joe Rowie or Joe Rowie? But anyway, 500 sats from him through Fountain. I like pickleball. Oh, good.
Oh, that's okay. Great.
That's nice.
You get some interest. This is an interesting set of boostergrams you get on this show.
Yeah, thank you for those boosts. And just to remind you, Sam and I share these boosts. What we should have done is we should have had a split for you, Dave. We don't have the technology to do that, I'm afraid.
No.
But we will have a look at splitting that. So the Podnews Weekly Review, what do I normally say here? The Podnews Weekly Review is separate from Podnews. Sam and I share everything. So please give us a boost in your new podcast apps. That would be lovely. Modernpodcastapps.com is, I believe, the place where you should be going these days. Or you can slip us some fiat at weekly.podnews.net. So what's happened for you this week then, Dave?
I'm going to be working on trying to get back in the namespace and sort of getting that thing tidied up. I started that a little bit today. I think I've been really focused on the ActivityPub bridge, and I've got a little bit more to do on that, but I'm really trying to resist the urge to code that, and because what it's missing is search.
You're doing it because it's fun.
I am. I am, and you know this as a programmer. You know that when you get into something that's really fun and challenging, it's hard to break away from it and do the thing that you know you should, the drudgery. So I'm resisting the urge to code more on that, and I'm going to stay in the namespace for the most part. And also, I got a little bit of cleanup to do on the index. We have some sweepers that go through and check for old feeds that have 404'd, and we give them grace periods. And then we have some things that look for iTunes IDs or Apple Podcast IDs that have changed, and just a bunch of cleanup scripts. And there's been some bugs in those that I've been squashing this week. So just stuff like that.
Well, I enjoyed your talking in the Podcasting 2.0 podcast last week about avoiding burnout and stuff like that. And I was taking notes all the way through there.
It's a hard thing hard thing in open source. Very, very common in open source. Yeah. So what happened for you this week, James?
I have been cursing Visual Studio Code, which is the programming editor that I use. I've been cursing that because they made a change. I foolishly pressed the update button for the latest version of Visual Studio Code, and then discovered that the SSH tool that it used basically was no longer going to support older Linux distros or something. So I'm using Amazon Linux 2, I think, on the main Podnews box, or was using that. And all of a sudden it wouldn't connect to it anymore. And so I couldn't edit any code, but more to the point, I couldn't do some of the editorial work that I do, which is still actually, going in and editing raw files.
Now, what kind of connection is this? Is this does VS Code, does it SSH over to the box?
Yeah. It SSHs,
live edit, so to speak?
Yeah, it SSHs over to the box, but then it installs some software on that box and uses that as a channel back and forth.
Okay.
And all of a sudden it stopped working.
Why? Do you know why? Do you know why?
It was just hidden away in the release notes. It was, we're no longer supporting this version of, glibc or something equally dull. And
libraries.
And so I ended up having to move the Podnews box yesterday, which I didn't want to do, and that's now running Amazon Linux 2023, so that's nice, and PHP 8, which means that, of course, that quite a lot of my dodgy PHP isn't working at the moment. I'm literally, as we speak, I'm looking at the terminal window, and I'm looking at the errors coming up and seeing another fatal error, and that's, oh dear, that's something else that I need to go and fix. All this kind of stuff. So anyway, it's been a great week of fiddling around with that sort of thing. And of course, Google and Yahoo both made a big change about bulk email, which means that you have to do certain things if you want your email to actually get to people.
Yes, this is the long-awaited changes that, I've been hearing about this. What exactly did they change?
Yeah, so there's, you have to have DKIM and you have to have, signing for your mail and all this kind of stuff. And it's just so... yes, they're doing the right thing. It's a bit like Apple Podcasts. Yes, they're doing the right thing, but it's so annoying.
Yeah. I feel it. Yeah, DMARC and all that. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, DMARC, and then there's some headers that you also need to include as well. And the person that runs the not quite open source but nearly piece of mailing list software that I use has misread what they've said, and it's just so that's been a bundle of fun. But there we are. But apart from that, it's been lovely.
You will survive. You will survive.
Yeah, and looking forward to Sam being here in Brisbane for the first time next week. So that should be good. We're all going out for a beer on Thursday night. If anybody else wants to join, then find the Brisbane Podcasters list on Facebook and you can come along as well, or just send me an email. Then that's cool. And that's it for this week. Thank you to both of our guests, Daryl and to Claire. You can also listen to the Podnews Daily and subscribe to the Podnews newsletter for more of these stories and other things too.
You can give feedback to James and Sam by sending this show a boostergram. If your podcast app doesn't support Boost, then grab a new app from podnews.net/new podcast apps.
Our music is from Studio Dragonfly. Our voiceover is Sheila D. We use Clean Feed for our main audio, and we're sponsored by Why Your Podcast Isn't Growing, a new podcast for podcasters, and hosted and sponsored by Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy.
Get updated every day. Subscribe to our newsletter at podnews.net. Tell your friends and grow the show.
And support us.
The Pod News Weekly Review will return next week. Keep listening.
And by popular demand...
BUZZSPROUT podcast hosting for you and me. Buzzsprout.com.
That's horrible.